Good evening and welcome to the Public Safety Building Committee meeting Thursday, November 2nd, 6 p.m. Call the meeting to order. All members are present except for Mr. Rooney, who is traveling tonight. First item of business tonight is we had advertised a public information session for those that haven't had an opportunity to hear the process for the last 10 weeks or so that we've been designing the building, bring everyone up to date. A notice was sent around to abutters that would also be getting a green card in the mail when the planning board process begins in a couple of weeks. But it was also widely advertised throughout the town. Our plan for this evening, for those residents that have joined us, is we are going to provide you a very brief update of what we have done since really the annual the special town meeting and the annual town election, where this project was approved, where we're at, and some foreshadowing to some of the public hearings that will be coming up related to this process, primarily relating to Planning Board and Conservation Commission. Once we do a brief overview of where we're at in the process, we will open it up to public comment and take any questions that anyone has. At the conclusion of that, we will then move on to a pretty packed agenda of other items that the committee needs to take some action on this evening. So, in general, since the midsummer time period when this committee was formed by the Board of Selectmen, we have hired the Vertex Company to act as the town's owner's project manager. We're joined tonight by John Lemieux and Steve Theron, who are the representatives specifically assigned to this project. They are basically eyes and ears of this project from start to finish, and act on the town's behalf on a day-to-day basis, monitoring progress, schedule, and probably most importantly, the cost of the project. After we had the owner's project manager on board, the committee met and the owner's project manager negotiated at this committee's request a contract with Context Architecture, who was formerly known as Donovan Sweeney. Donovan Sweeney was the same architectural firm that assisted us with the feasibility study when we were looking at the current police and fire station location, as well as the schematic design that was presented at the town meeting. Over the past 10 weeks, there have been numerous public meetings, as well as meetings between Context, Vertex, and members of various town employees to work through ultimately the design of the building and the location of the building. There's been additional engineering performed and additional tests done, such as testing for exact location of septic. And I'm happy to report, and Jeff will expand upon this, that we've been able to stay in the area that we promised town meeting that we'd be able to stay in. Furthermore, we have worked collaboratively with the Golf Course Committee, which was appointed after us by the Board of Selectmen, to analyze the future of the golf course. And what we've done collaboratively with them, and in the best interest of having this project move forward in a seamless fashion, is envisioned what the entire parcel would look like if golf course operations were to continue. So when Jeff from Context Architecture walks you through where we are at today, you will see some theoretical locations that have been tested for suitability of where a golf course clubhouse would be moved, where the parking would be. And also we've had some extensive conversations with the school committee related to their desire to continue the Woodward traffic circle and continue that roadway. We've done traffic studies related to that roadway and what would be required in terms of signaling. And that's a lot of work that has happened in a 10-week time frame. Where this committee plans to go from here is a public notice was filed, and there will be a planning board hearing scheduled for Monday, November 13th. And our goal is also to be on the Conservation Commission's public hearing for Thursday, November 16th. We've been told by both committees, commissions, boards that it may certainly require more than one hearing given the magnitude of this project, and we fully expect that there will be multiple hearings related to that. We've been trying to coordinate in advance one of this session tonight, obviously being a part of that, to make sure that all feedback is considered. While there may be legitimate reasons why the feedback can't be incorporated, we're trying to get as much feedback as we can at this point in the process. At the same time that the planning and regulatory type hearings are going on, the town will receive a revised cost estimate. Now, that's not going to be the ultimate cost of the project, but we will be taking this final design and getting a revised cost for the project. That number could be higher, could be lower, could be the same amount that we are currently budgeting. This committee will then need to make some decisions based upon the results of that outcome. We expect that outcome the Monday after Thanksgiving, which I believe is the 27th of November. So we will have a public meeting at that time, receive the results, and determine the next steps related to the project from a cost perspective. With that, that's a general overview of where we're at. I'm going to turn it over to Jeff Shaw, who's the president of Context Architecture, has been really working with us for a better part of 3 years at this point, to walk you through where we stood at town meeting and where we stand today. So the diagrams that I'll be starting with are what we presented at town meeting, and then we'll open it up to questions from the public.
Thank you. Thank you, Jason. And I apologize in advance because my voice is starting to go here, but hopefully you can all hear me well. Something
wrong with the microphone. We can't hear you.
Would it be easier to go over there, maybe?
No, as long as the microphone works. Oh, there we go. All right. I think it's on now. Okay. The first plan that I have to show is, as Jason said, it's a site plan. It's the plan that we presented and worked on as part of the schematic design process that was approximately started a year ago and finished up at town meeting. This represented at the time, the best plan that we could put forth to accommodate the public safety on the site, the possible connection to a Woodward School driveway, as well as leaving the remainder of the site for possible golf use. At the same time, as you can see, there is a roadway sort of plan behind the project for that golf access potential. This plan didn't change a whole lot, but we are exploring several particular areas like the connection between Corderville Road, Route 85, and the Public Safety Building, and how that is specifically going to be configured, as well as all the various pieces around the station. So this was the plan back in February. Also back in February, we had an artist do renderings of what the building might look like, and this is prior to this next level of detail in the site. And in fact, some of these renderings are before we made an adjustment to the building and flipped the apparatus to the other side. But these were the two renderings prepared at the time. Oops. So since then, as Jason pointed out, we've done a considerable amount of engineering and design work and consultation with the town and the building committee to look at the layout of the building, and particularly the septic field, which is now planned to be much closer to the site, just to the right of where it shows the future golf course clubhouse. That was positioned after doing testing and proving it out in the field that it would work there. Most of the rest of the site layout looks very similar to what it did before. Site tweaks have been made in order to configure it for best engineering practice. And we've also looked at landscaping around the front entry, and specifically moving the memorial and flagpole from the current public safety complex to this complex. So that's shown there in a sort of the round area just below the building here, where the hand is pointing. The floor plan is undergone quite a bit of scrutiny from both departments and this building committee. It is pretty much set in stone at this point, and reflects the space needs that was determined as part of the feasibility study. Building really has not changed much in terms of its footprint. The square footage actually has gone down slightly. But all the building elements have been determined at this point. So it's a full one-story, and then on the second floor, it's a much smaller second floor. It's just for police administration and fire dormitory and a fitness room. We also have computer renderings of now what the building is planned to look like, and I apologize because it doesn't have the landscaping like the artist renderings did, but this is the building itself. It's currently anticipated to be a masonry building, brick masonry, and you can see the front view here. This is the view looking essentially up Route 85 across the golf course, as you would see it sort of slightly down in a lower position from the building, which is somewhat on the hill. You're seeing the view towards the apparatus room and the training tower. Here is the back quarter view, approximately from the golf clubhouse, the rear of the fire apparatus. This view is from the opposite side of the building. It's the police entry and police garages. And then the back quarter view of that same police garage and entry element. So that's essentially where we stand today, and as Jason pointed out, significant amount of work has gone into the project. I actually have in front of me what's called the design development document set. It's about 120 drawings that have been done so far to document the project. In addition to this, there is a fairly thick specifications book that's been prepared, and all of those materials we're intending to send to the cost estimator this week to prepare that cost estimate.
With that update, I'll open it to the public to see if there's any questions or comments or concerns of anything you've heard to date, or any outstanding items that you have in your mind that may have been left over from where you may have left off at the special town meeting. If you don't mind just going to the microphone.
I'm Tom McCarthy, 13 Lattisquama Road. I just had some questions about all those doors on the fire station. What is there, five doors in the front and 5 in the rear?
You are correct.
Now, why do we need 5 doors?
There are 5 apparatus bays, and the bays are designed to be front access and rear access so that the fire department can respond in both directions. I'll also point out that the rear doors are intended to be solid panels, not glass. The front doors would be glass, but the rear doors would be solid panels.
How many pieces of equipment do we have now? Do you know?
You can.
Chief, do you want to come up and talk to that?
That's a good idea.
Chief Morrow, Fire Department. So currently we have 2 engines, a ladder truck, 2 ambulances, a support vehicle, which we call the squad, and we have a pickup truck and a fire prevention vehicle and a boat.
Are you adding new equipment for this new fire station?
Not at this time, no.
So this is greatly in excess of what you have now.
It is in excess for future expansion, correct?
And how much future expansion do you anticipate?
I don't have a crystal ball, but looking into the future, possibly another fire engine, potentially another ambulance, depending on how busy the services get over the years. But we designed it and looked at it from a future perspective and not just building it for today, because
And what's the future perspective based upon, Chief?
it's based upon looking back at past history of where we've been for the past 30 or 40 years, and where my projection would be in the next 30 or 40 years based on the increase in the size of the community and the population and that type of growth.
Well, my understanding is Southborough is pretty well built out. There's very little residential development left. I know people out there searching for house lots, they can't find them. I know there's a project up on Route 9 that's probably going to happen. And also, hasn't there been new technology that's been able to cut down on the need for firefighting? I understand there's very few fires in Southborough because of, the modern equipment we're all required to have in our houses. We have smoke detectors, we have carbon monoxide detectors, at every level on carbon monoxide and the smoke detectors. We went through this with the schools, I remember. I thought everybody knew what they were doing. I said, they must know what they're doing. They're projecting we need all these new schools. And then they tore down the existing school, the Woodward School, built all these schools, and now I'm hearing they overbuilt the schools. And now we've got this large project that you're projecting. If you want a fire station, fine, we all voted it through, but I don't think we should overbuild. I don't see why we should need to overbuild. That building could obviously be expanded in the future if it was required.
Chief, can you maybe just point
The
out?
other thing, I'm not quite finished, Jason. The other thing is, other towns have been very unhappy with these drive-in through the rear and then come out the front, because it's cut back on the storage that they need, because they have to keep those rear doors open, and it's interfered with their operations. So I understand that this is going to happen, but, I'm a taxpayer. My taxes have gone up every year, just like everybody else in this town. And I don't want to overbuild. I don't want to pay more than I need to pay. And there's a lot of people that feel that way. And, just because I got voted through a town meeting and someone had a number of $30 million doesn't mean we have to spend that kind of money. And so I think you should have to justify everything that you do. And, when you look at public safety, part of it is the availability of people in your community. I remember in the old days, fire chief and the police chief had to live in town. So if there wasn't an emergency, if there was a problem, they were right at hand, unless they were on vacation and they had somebody else that lived in town that could take over. So there's a lot that's involved with so-called public safety. That's all I had to say for now.
No, and I'll just answer the question on the drive-through, and I'll give you an example. Currently, we have to back our apparatus in, and one of the issues we have is storage of the equipment, and our ambulances are stacked one behind the other. Last week, we had a medical call first thing in the morning. The front ambulance wouldn't start, so the second ambulance was unavailable for a portion of time, and we actually had to push it out of the way to get it out of the garage to get it to the call. In the interim, we had to call mutual aid ambulance to get it started there in the event that we couldn't get the other ambulance out and move it. So, it looks like it's not a necessity to have a drive-through, but it's nice to have that access if a vehicle doesn't start or something breaks down. And we currently have most of our apparatus there is stacked back to back in the station.
Well, I would think, Chief, that part of your what do they call it, your job is to make sure that the equipment is functioning and operating. There shouldn't be equipment sitting in there that's parked that is unable to be moved. I mean, we all have cars, we all have trucks, and we try to make sure that they're properly maintained.
Well, the vehicles are properly maintained. They're started and ran every day.
Right.
However, if it hasn't been run for 12 hours because it didn't move, sometimes there's electrical equipment in there. In this case, there's a breaker in there off the 12-volt battery system that didn't allow it to fully charge, and it wouldn't start. And these are very sophisticated pieces of equipment, and they're very expensive, and things break down on them.
The other thing is the doors. I go into Boston occasionally. I go by Copley Square. There's a fire station there that's 100 years old, and they have to back into it. And they never seem to have any problem. I mean, they back into it. The fire station is still there. They haven't knocked it down and built a new one. So there's a lot going on here. I know everybody on this committee is trying to do a great job, and I do understand that. You've done a great job. But please don't overspend our money. This is our money that you're spending. And the answers I've heard so far are not very satisfactory.
So, a few comments just to add into what the chief said. Chief, I think it would be important just to support what you're saying, to just, can you identify, using this map, which vehicles are actually excess at this point? Just so that people that don't understand how big fire apparatus is understand really what the excess capacity will be on move-in day?
So these aren't labeled, and of course, the drawing was done just to give an example of the size of the equipment and where they would be placed. But I believe the first two bays, which would be on the left, are the two ambulances and another support vehicle. The next,
You currently have.
which we currently have. The next two bays, the next bay is two fire engines, which we currently have. The next bay over to the right of that would be another fire engine for future, and then the tower ladder truck would be next to that. And then the other support vehicles on the far right.
Can you
And
speak to the,
then, and then there would be a boat, which would be on the far right in the rear.
and can you speak to the, I think it's somewhere between 5 and 10 trailers that are currently stored in, I don't know, little huts out back of your
Yeah,
current station?
that's part of the emergency management equipment. So there's a trailer that has radios in it, backup radios. It's called a command trailer. In the event of some type of a storm or disaster, that's currently parked outside, which would be parked inside the building right now. And then there's other support trailers with different equipment in it that don't necessarily need to be inside, but are outside, but should be covered.
So those vehicles, we have in the site plan here where this sort of floating hand is, there's a covered canopy essentially over the parking spaces there, and that's where those emergency management trailers would be parked. We actually looked at, as part of this project, building an outbuilding essentially to house those interior, and determined, number one, there wasn't enough space, and number two, the additional cost from that would be a burden to the project. So this was a cost-effective way of keeping them on site and protected.
And I guess just for Mr. McCarthy, for your benefit, when we were the Public Safety Study Committee, and a lot of us were on that committee, this building, we got a lot of pressure around the cost, and we expect and should expect continued pressure around the cost, because none of us want it to A, go over, but B, we have every intention of bringing this thing in under what was approved. But we have now had time to further study that particular area, and the chief, when times got tough and we needed to start cutting back, he actually sacrificed a good chunk of one of those bays. And our further research has shown that that sacrifice would have cost the town money because of actually having to create additional walls instead of building what I would call, borderline of a rectangle. And then as a firefighter in another community that has double bays that we back trucks in back to back, it's a 1950s building that was originally built as a police station, I can attest to the chief's what happens when something breaks down or it doesn't start. I've had vehicles that I started half an hour ago, then I go to a call and it doesn't start. Doesn't mean that the equipment wasn't properly maintained, but having that back to back, I was able to get another engine or another ambulance out the door right away. And God forbid that's your house. That's a very, very small expense to, potentially save a life.
Yeah, we're talking about a lot of planning here, I understand that. But I understand we've only had 3 fires in town last year. We make 3 runs a day, most of them are ambulance runs. And I know that you folks are all very dedicated to having a terrific fire and police station. I have no arguments with the police station. I tried to get one done 8 years ago, in fact, with Pete Goodney right there. And, but I don't see why we have to overbuild. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me. It's because somebody wants something that we're going to go ahead and do this big project. It's 250% larger than the existing fire station. And we just heard you mention something about this equipment that's outside that's going to be put in the bays, and I just heard from the architect that that's not so, it's going to be put in the outside somewhere. I think, I was in the construction business for years, and the easiest way to cut money out of a project is to try to make sure that you're not building too much square footage. Because people always have wishes. And, you know, we've got two of you I know are with the police department that are on this board. I'm sure other people are associated with public safety, and I'm sure you're all trying to do the right thing. I have no doubts about that. But there's no sense in overbuilding something. That's what happened with our schools. We spent all sorts of money, and now we're talking about dropping a school off. And I just think it should be thumped. And I think you should thump it and not walk around listening to all these stories about how we really need to do this or we really need to do that. Make people justify it, is all I'm saying. Thank you.
Can I just ask you a question? How do you get to your math of 250% of the current?
I did it at the time. It was
Chief, how
about
big is your
8,500 square feet, according to the assessor's map, is the existing fire station. And I think your new fire station is what, 25,000 square feet, something like that?
So my recollection is the fire station is somewhere in the 20 to 21,000 square feet, right? 'Cause it's
Yeah,
double-
that
two
would be
level.
that would be the 250 that I worked out. I worked that out before for town meeting. I didn't recheck my numbers, but I believe the assessor's map carries the fire station as 8,500 square feet, roughly. So that's about right. I was right. So if it's 21 to 22,000 square feet, if you do the division, it'll come out at 250%.
I would agree that division works.
I've also, if you want to get into it, I've also had a couple of people come to me that were firefighters at high positions in Southborough, and in offhand discussions tell me that there is really no need for a new fire station, that the existing fire station is perfectly adequate for our needs. But I understand all the town, everybody has to have something new, and they want a nice big complex. I do understand that, because that's what's going to happen. But I'm saying, please, we're paying the bills. And don't let this thing run away. It's already run away with itself, as far as I can see.
You're certainly entitled to your opinion.
Yes, I know
think
I'm entitled to my opinion. Thank God I live in America.
I think that the town has spoken in terms of the project needs. What we are hoping to vet out in this discussion is concerns about the proposed construction, where it's going, and the impact to the surrounding area. I don't think we plan to revisit the size of this building. Chief, did you have something?
No, I was just going to add, and Mr. McCarthy's been in town a long time. As you know, we used to operate out of 2 fire stations, and one down off of Southville Road, and that's no longer being staffed or used by the fire department. And
No,
had-
Chief,
we had to
I'm
bring the
aware of
equipment
that.
up from there,
My
too.
wife was a volunteer EMT for years. In a number of years, she was a volunteer policewoman for a while, too. I guess she was looking for something to do besides beating me up every day. So I'm aware of that. You had a station on the other side of town. And a lot of people feel we should still have a station on the other side of town. So I understand.
Jason, may I say one thing about the drive-through doors to Mr. McCarthy?
Yes.
So I was a skeptic on the drive-through doors myself, Mr. McCarthy, and then a firefighter brought me an article that showed that, 30% of on-call deaths for firefighters were backing accidents, and I was shocked at that. And a way to alleviate that is through the drive-through bays. Like I said, putting the doors in the back versus a wall, if it saves one person's life, it's worth it to me. So that's why I'm in favor of the drive-through door. But I was a skeptic at first until I read the article that he brought me. So.
So I'm John Tomany. I live at 105 Pine Hill Road, and by full disclosure, I'm a member of the fire department. I'm actually a call firefighter in town, not full-time. Just a couple comments, and I would ask, if we could put the schematic back up of the floor plan of the apparatus bay. What you're looking at is space for 13 pieces of equipment. They're not all primary moving vehicles. Some of them are trailers, the boat and such that the chief mentioned. Out of those 13 spaces, 10 of them are currently filled by existing equipment the department owns today. So I think it's important to point out there's not a huge expansion shown in this floor plan. Keep in mind, we're also designing a building for a 50-year time frame, potentially longer than that, right? That's our expectation. It's 50 years. It may be 60, 70, or longer. You know, the other comment I'd just like to make about, I've been in the public safety business for a long time on both a professional and personal basis is, you know, the statement about fire stations in other parts of Massachusetts, particularly the city of Boston. If you talk with officials in the city of Boston, they have tremendous struggles with the equipment and apparatus and the facilities they currently have. A lot of those buildings are 100+ years old. That's not by choice. That's a situation that they're kind of forced into. They have to kind of live within their means of what those buildings can handle. But they're by no means really by modern standards of the way they need to operate. So I think it's just important that we actually kind of keep things on a factual basis if we can. Thank you.
Is there any other public comment?
Hi, Oop Galecki, Marlborough Road. Just a question for Jeff. Is this going to be a LEED certified building?
Currently, excuse me, currently there is no plans to officially apply for LEED. However, our office, as part of every project that we do, puts in quite a bit of sustainable features into the project, and almost, I'd say 100% of them don't come at any additional cost to the construction. So we do a lot of techniques, particularly on the energy and water use side, but also with materials that we're selecting for the project, user comfort and things like that, that would fall into LEED categories, but we are not currently planning on achieving a LEED status.
Have estimates been done of the carrying cost of this building? We just talked about a 50-year lifetime. You know, the energy costs obviously are going to be a long-term cost for the town.
Right. And in fact, there was a discussion as part of this process on which type of mechanical system would be used for the building, and the engineers, as part of the requirements of the building code, did a study with a baseline system and 3 alternative high-performing systems to look at a 30-year payback and first cost as well as a 30-year payback. And system that is being planned right now has almost an instantaneous payback because the cost to install it is actually less than what the baseline system would be. So in terms of energy use, that was a key component of what the committee was studying.
But in terms of the payoff is different than the carrying costs for, you know, once the payoff is made, you know,
Yeah,
in
sure.
an accounting
Of course.
point of view, you're still paying money to run it.
Yeah, right.
So, you know, how does that compare with the existing?
There's 2 ways to
expenses?
look at it. You can't really compare it well with the existing because it's like, you know, you just can't. They're 2 completely different things. The cost for this facility, because of the size of the facility, would be more, but if you look at it on a per square foot basis, we're going to be far more efficient than the current systems in those 2 buildings.
I
that
know,
they
I would
have.
understand that from modern
Yeah.
technology that you could do that.
Yeah.
I was just curious whether there was a number that's the town is going to have to pay every year in terms of the estimated energy cost for the building.
Yeah, actually, that number does exist, which we can get for you. I don't know it off the top of my head. And of course, as you, I'm sure, assume, it's an estimate at this point, based upon
yeah.
anticipated use. But yeah, we do have that number.
Mr. Chairman, can we perhaps get that number publicized?
Yeah, so I assume you're referring to the HVAC report, Jeff? That
Yeah.
was, yeah, so there's an HVAC report. We'll post it to our website,
Okay,
as with any document we're provided.
great, thank you.
Is there any other public comment related to what we've walked through thus far? Mr. Perry?
Yes, good evening. David Perry, 22 Main Street. I'm sorry I arrived a little bit late. Just fill me in. Is it, if I didn't stand up, would that be it and we're all going to leave? Or is there some more presentation?
So there is an extensive agenda for the Public Safety Committee, but it's more blocking and tackling of our to-dos. There's no intended additional presentation by the architect of where we stand.
I see. So you're going to go into a regular meeting following.
it's an open meeting, open to all.
I
Sorry,
see.
but it's-
Okay. Okay, well, in that case, then I do have a, I thought you were going to make a longer presentation. But anyway, so given that you're not, let me just say, well, just to preface this, I'm not going to criticize anything that you've done. It's been very thoroughly hashed out. We can all argue about numbers and vehicles and God knows what else, but I think you've done a pretty good job, and the site's fantastic, et cetera, and so forth. What I am interested in is going back to the visual appearance of the building from '85, because I do, and I don't want to be overly critical here, because I want to sort of get a comment from the architect. But when we had a presentation last spring, early spring, winter, the building was reversed, wasn't it? We had the far end of the building was at this end, and the bays were at the other end, and the architect got up and said that's very important because the view from '85 is very, very important. Aesthetics and beauty are important. That's why it was reversed. Now we have the flat end of the building at this end. By the way, I'm glad to see we have this. At least we have this little tower at this end. But anyway, my point here is, okay. So when I look at the plan, I do have to acknowledge that, given the layout and the driveways and so forth, obviously you have to have the driveways at this end. I acknowledge, I know that's what he's going to say, so I'm not going to ask him to say it. It's obvious. I'm an architect. I can see, okay, he had to reverse it. But that goes to the issue then that the view from '85 somehow has to be dealt with. Because when we met, I was this ex officio golf group we had last year, working with the golf course master plan group, that we had this expert golf architect whose name I can't remember. What was his name? Brian Silver, yeah. He was amazing. He came up in the snow and, overnight flight. And we met in this thing, and he just remembered the place from childhood. He didn't have to sort of walk it, he just sort of remembered it. And one thing he did say I'll never forget was that, when you've got to save the golf course, number one, and B, when you do that, you shouldn't see the fire. He basically, I think I'm not sort of being overly, I think I'm saying it. He said you shouldn't, or you should see as little as possible. Or he either said you shouldn't see, or you should see as little as possible of the fire station from the golf course. I think that's accurate. You can correct me, other people here who are there. I think he said that. He said there should be a huge buffer between the golf course and the fire station. I mean, trees, berms, put the trees on top of berms. Anything you can do to sort of make, when you play golf, you don't look at a fire station. Now, I don't want to overemphasize this, but beauty is important, and why did we all vote for this? Because we wanted. It's not just to play golf, is it? Because many of us don't play golf. It's an aesthetic thing. It's an asset, a beautiful asset. Now, some would argue, okay, we're spending 25 million, whatever it is. Let's look at the darn thing. Why can't we look at it? Well, of course we're going to look at it, but, do we have to look at all of it? So maybe I'm jumping the gun here, but, I did look online, and someone, I think the planning board, put your plans online. They're all online. I'm looking at sheet C3, which has much more detail than that. It has a layout. It has detention basins and so forth, this side. I mean, don't you, in that area, do you happen to have that, the C3 plan? It's called grading plan.
I do not. I do not have it on the digital. I have a copy in front of me, but I don't have it on the
Okay. Well, anyway, look, maybe I'm jumping the gun here because the golf course members are here. Maybe they can stand up and talk about it. But you have instead of one or two, originally there were one or two drainage basins, weren't there? And now there's one gigantic one on sheet C3, and it's right where that. What's that called? I can't really
It's
read
where the note is. Yeah, it's approximately from this point here. It runs from here to here, almost the entirety.
That entire area is gouged out as an immense sort of catch basin for floodwater, which obviously is necessary. I'm not arguing necessity, but the issue is this. What is it? What's down there? South. That's south, isn't it? Yeah, south is to the right. So what's to the south? I mean, if that's just grass, we're just going to be looking across, grading up grass across a detention basin at fire vehicles and And let's put it this way, sort of without trying to be detrimental. I mean, the least attractive portion of the building is the flat-roofed, vehicular end, isn't it? I think it's a fact. The other end is more attractive, unfortunately, but that's in back. So it goes to the issue here, are we going to have massive landscaping to the right of the detention basin on berms? And maybe I'm jumping the gun here, because I don't want to criticize the internals of the building and the vehicular layout. I think it's been so very, very thoroughly done. I just trust you guys, you've done it 50 times over. I'm willing to accept that, but I'm very much concerned about when residents and visitors drive into town. The view from 85 is what's absolutely fundamentally critical. Besides saving the golf course itself, of course, it's the view from 85. So do we have any thoughts on this, or is this sort of being left to the golf course committee? Or maybe the architect has some thoughts on this, or maybe it's outside your scope. I don't know.
So let me just clarify a few points, and then I'll turn it over to our architect if he has any additional thoughts. The layout of the building, this is what was up on the screen at town meeting. The fire apparatus bays were on the right side. The reason the fire apparatus bays are on the right side is because we were trying to accommodate the potential to keep the golf course open, okay? So we couldn't have the traffic flows work in such a way that the fire station was on the right side, sharing a driveway with folks trying to get to the golf course and or the school property. In addition, it was a subtle point, but it's an important point, is when we were at town meeting, we were expecting the septic field to be, I'll call it, closer to Lotta-Squamish Road, in the middle of a fairway. That septic field has been brought much, much closer to the building, which will again, unless, and please correct me if I misspeak, but will allow for, one of the main requests that we have been given is to try to keep the golf course operational while this building is being constructed, so we don't lose the momentum to sustain that property. In addition, I think Mr. McCarthy was very clear and speaks for many residents in this town that there comes a cost to all of this, right? So whether landscaping is a good cost or a bad cost in everyone's opinion, that's to their own choosing. But the main reason that drainage basin is now over here is because of the movement of the septic field, and that's why that changed. So there are a lot of balls in the air that this committee, along with our consultants, as well as other committees, are trying to handle. I think we are always open to feedback and ways to make that more accessible and look better, but there are some major limiting factors in our ability, and we can't lose sight of the cost component that we've already been reminded of. So I don't know if you have any.
I can add to that, Jason. I know, and I'm going to flip back to the beginning here. This is the site plan that was up at town meeting, and you can see there was 2 drainage basins, as was accurately referred to, and that green band, the green band approximately here represented a berm with plantings on it that was to do essentially what we just heard, to screen the building from the golf course. That was part of our original concepts. As the engineering progressed, that berm slowly got eroded because of the requirements for the drainage that was there. And we also felt it would be improper to expand essentially the property line between the golf course and the public safety to take more space from the golf course just to build back that berm. So we tried to stay on our side of the line, and in the course of doing so, we lost the berm. We can always add it back, either between the drainage basin and the parking lot, or on the other side of the golf side of the drainage basin, but it would move the property line. Essentially, it'd move that line further into the golf course in order to build it. So it certainly could be done, but that's the caveat, I guess, I'd throw out there.
So, Mr. Perry, I would just ask you that if you have recommendations, this committee would certainly forward them on to the architect for consideration. But I think you kind of understand the view to date, and I would certainly welcome any feedback. I know there's a significant number of members of the golf committee here. I would certainly welcome any views that they have, and they may need to discuss it at a future meeting, but
Yeah, no, fine. No, I'm glad you spoke. You clarified things, and you made some points I'd forgot. You know, there was a berm there, and I understand why you've taken it away. Because you have that sort of dotted line, which what does it have? What's the three initials on it?
Yeah, it's called limit of work, LMW.
Limit of work. Okay, LOW, right. But it's a completely artificial line, isn't it? It's just the line which happens to have resulted from your limit of work. I mean, it could be anywhere. I mean, couldn't it? It can be pushed south. But the point is, I think you made a very good point. You know, we did have a berm with trees on top between the right-hand up and down route of parking on the right-hand side of the screen, right around that bend to the right-hand side of the screen, and the detention bases. Now it's gone. And I'm glad to say you said it could be put back, because you said there's two alternatives. Either we put it back, either you put it back, or you have to put it to the right of the LOW line, limit of work line. But the trouble is, if you put it to the right, to the south of the limit of work line, it's downhill, isn't it? That's the trouble. And therefore, it's far less effective. The trees have to grow double the height. Am I correct? So anyway, maybe it's not your job. I mean, maybe it's the golf course's job. But I just think this is such a fundamental issue. You know, you're not, because this Brian Silver said, please, you know, save the golf course, number one, and make sure you don't see as little of the building as you can. I think you all agree with that, basically. You know, we're not talking to hide it, are we? Because, you know, the berm never hid it. It allowed a view corridor. You drove up 85, and then you didn't see it initially. You saw it when you were almost opposite it. Then you looked right, and then you saw it. Anyway, I just sort of, maybe someone from the golf course. Is there going to be a presentation from the golf course at some time? A golf course group, or maybe that hasn't been thought about?
I don't know if their chairman wants to speak on that.
Sure.
Okay.
To Mr. Perry's questions, we just hired a golf course architect to interact with your architect on the south edge of this area here to help with just these sort of questions in terms of how it impacts the golf course and shapes that. Is Mr. McNeil here? Right here. So as to make the best judgments and best use of that material we're going to move around in that area within reason. We understand who has priority here, but it behooves us to do as little damage to the golf course as possible while satisfying the needs for you know, the visual look, the need for drainage, and just basically trying to knit this together so it works better. So, and we just literally just started that. So we're trying to interject ourselves here at the right moment here before you guys do finished drawings for your release to make some changes.
Yeah, I think now's the time actually, because with our applications to both planning and conservation, we want to be able to present to them a coordinated final thing. And if we are going to be changing some drainage stuff, or, you know, whatever it is, it would be good to get on the same page with them too. So I'm glad I'm glad to hear that you've got the architect on board and you're starting.
Yeah,
that's good.
The advisory committee was instrumental. Thank them. But at any rate, I think we can make some small touches here to make this work a lot better and be integrated. Thank you.
Any other public comment? All right. Seeing none, progress to the next item on the committee's agenda. Approval of meeting minutes from October 12th, 2017. These were circulated by Mr. Lyons. Are there any comments from the committee? That was a very detailed meeting, and Mr. Rooney said at the last meeting, but I mean, these minutes are flawless and, in my opinion, accurately depict the interactions that occurred. And John, thank you for doing that, because I just think it helps with the transparency of the project as people look back at what we did, what our thoughts were along the way. So I'd like, so I'd like to make a motion to accept the minutes as presented for Thursday, October 12th. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Goodney. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? I see 2 abstentions at the end due to absence. Next item on the agenda is the chairman's update. Since our last meeting, I spent some time talking with Mr. Lemieux from Vertex about a change order process. We'll run into that item on our next agenda item, and have been at least copied on the emails going back and forth between the town's consultants and the regulatory boards in town, both planning and conservation. I can tell you there's a lot going on, and there's a lot going on just due course of business that these folks are working very hard to meet our aggressive schedule. So just wanted to thank everyone for that. There's a couple items that everyone should just be aware of. On Monday, Vertex Context are sitting down with the town employees that oversee the regulatory boards to just continue to open up the lines of communication and ensure that they are literally dotting their I's and crossing their T's to make sure that every submission that they give is complete, accurate, and will fulfill what each of the boards are looking for. And I would encourage those groups to continue that process even as we get further into the building process, because I think it'll just allow for a much more coordinated exercise along the way. On Monday, November 13th, this project is slated for a 7 p.m. planning board hearing, master site plan approval. I will post a meeting for our committee should anyone choose to show up, comment, or have any discussion. We will certainly be covered by open meeting law for that. I will not be in attendance, but we can certainly post a meeting to that effect. I assure you that Jeff and his team and Vertex will obviously would love any support they could get. Likewise, for that Thursday night, the expectations will be on the Conservation Commission's agenda. I haven't seen any final confirms come on that, but I know at least the green cards, which are the registered mail cards, went out to the abutters related to the planning process. And then further down the road, the team will be having some internal meetings related to communication and IT. Any questions on any of those updates? Okay. So next item on our agenda is change order process. So for those that were at our last meeting, I think we had I'll call it a spirited dialogue about what to do when change orders come up going forward and what the process should be. The next morning, I worked with Mr. Lemieux, and over that course of that week, we came up with some language that's been presented in front of you. That language is meant to cover, pretty much any situation that comes up, both with our design team, but also looking forward to the general contractor, because I think we all know that changes are going to occur due to unforeseen situations. We wanted to have a process in place that everyone was comfortable with. So in summary, what these say are, we're going to need to identify a point of contact for the town that Vertex can call when they get informed of a change request. That point of contact would be authorized to approve expenditures under $5,000 if they had an impact on the project timeline. For expenses greater than $5,000 but less than $10,000 that impact the project timeline, that point of contact would need to confer with what is referred to as a alternative point of contact. So therefore you have basically 2 people sounding that there could be some moving forward before the next meeting. In both instances, my understanding is that there would then be a presentation at the next meeting to get everyone up to speed on any changes that occurred. Goal is we never have to use this process, but I think we need the process in place to begin with. Any amount greater than $10,000 would require a posted Public Safety Building Committee, meeting. Obviously, we're going to have to mobilize quickly. We're going to have to do it within about 48 hours notice, which is going to naturally create scheduling conflicts, but we only need 5 folks in the room to make decisions, and I think we're all focused on timeline, and if we have 5 folks in the room, then we'll be able to use dial-in for those that may not be able to attend, because it may not be an evening meeting. And then, of course, anything that doesn't impact project timeline would just be brought to the next committee meeting for a full committee vote. So before we talk about point of contact, et cetera, just wanted to get general reactions to that process. Mr. Officer?
Yes, I have a concern about the way this is laid out. When I think of change orders, I think of 2 things: more money and more time. This addresses the money aspect, but I don't know that we've said, well, wait a minute, if there's something that requires additional time, we need to kind of set budget numbers on what the additional time is that can be approved before it goes to the full committee. This is in terms of dollars, but it doesn't talk about, or it doesn't address a change in time.
Mr. Lemieux?
Given how tight our schedule is, I think we need to think ahead about that.
I don't disagree. I think the point of this would be to authorize work and keep it moving, not to completely negotiate out. If someone says, we hit a boulder, okay, and I can't reach anybody, and it's a really big boulder and they're gonna want 2 extra days, I'm not gonna be able, I can't agree to the days, but at that point I won't have the change order document in front of me. I won't even probably have a PCO.
Right.
I know that we need to get rid of that obstruction to keep things moving. The discussion about the time, we'll have to defer it. Because I as well have not, I don't feel comfortable being judge and jury about extending the contract duration.
Right.
Just to keep the work going.
And I guess the presumption here is that anything that costs $10,000 or less isn't going to require a lot of additional time. Is that correct?
Oh, now you could have a very inexpensive widget that's on the critical path. But in that case, I would probably defer to, we've got 48 hours, let's have a meeting and talk about it. You know what I'm saying? Something that could, if we didn't buy it.
Like, takes 2 months to produce.
Or
Right,
procure.
and we missed it somewhere along the line and it wasn't ordered in time, where there's a strike at the factory or whatever.
If there's something of that magnitude, I would just defer to another meeting. I think
Understand.
the point of this is more for those unexpecteds that could stop the job from a construction side, or from a design side, if something comes up that, hey, I gotta get this consultant out here, we found a blank. Okay, let's do it. I'll call, if the point of contact is Jason or, whoever it is.
And most of this is expected, these kind of changes would be expected to come up mostly in the site work? Is that accurate?
I would say traditionally, a lot of your unexpected stuff comes up during site work. If it's coming up in
Underground.
the building,
Yep.
hopefully there's a little more, none of it, the things that will stop you cold usually happen when you're digging, when you're putting the foundation in. Once the steel is up, it's going to move, and if there's an issue, usually it's been sniffed out through an R5 process, so you have a better idea that something is coming, that there's an extra cost, and we can deal with it that way.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other comments, questions, concerns? Mr. Moorhead?
I just want to address the value, because I think 5's pretty high to cap you guys at. How many of your
I wrote this,
additional?
by the way, not him.
How many? Okay, so how many of your additional services, Jeff and Ellen, are? Most of them are probably under that, right?
Yeah,
So
I have to say that
we could spend all day
there were
under
a couple of
5,000.
things that did come up earlier, and we talked about them already, and hopefully that's the end. I don't expect other things to come up, and usually there aren't anything in the design side that's, can't wait for the next meeting. to be resolved. So I don't necessarily see this being used so much as a design tool. I think it's more of a construction-related tool. And in that sense, there's plenty of things that are less than 5,000 that might be a critical path type decision-making thing. So we've actually seen 5 and 10 being the thresholds in many, many jobs for that.
Any other questions or comments? So before we talk about point of contact, my thought was, should the committee approve this as drafted, that I would send a formal request to the Board of Selectmen, asking them to sign off on this approach as well. And Ms. Cook, if you think that advisory needs to weigh in or should be notified of it, I'm certainly open to feedback on that.
I do not.
So let's talk about point of contact. My recommendation would be that Mr. Purple, as the Chief Procurement Officer of the town already, be in a position to make those decisions at an amount less than $5,000. And then that some member of this committee be his sounding board for that $5,000 to $10,000 threshold, and then all 9 of us are part of the decision greater than 10,000. Everyone amenable to that suggestion?
I think that's a good suggestion.
I don't think he has a choice. So, any thoughts on representation from this committee to just help vet with Mr. Purple?
I do, and I think it should, my personal opinion is I think it should be the chair, since most of the communications are already going through you already, and you're more privy to a lot of the insights and outs ongoing that. My suggestion would be have the chair be the alternate, if you're amenable to it,
Yeah,
unless somebody else would be interested in it.
This is a 3-year project, so I'm comfortable listing chair, not a name, but the chair. And I think the vice chair should be the default if the chair is unavailable. Whoever is sitting in these seats this year, next year, once we cut that ribbon. So, is there a motion on this?
I'll make a motion to accept the draft as written.
Microphone.
What's that?
Mike?
I'm sorry. I make a motion to accept the draft as written for the procedure for approval of extra work for the public safety project.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion on that? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. I will communicate to the Board of Selectmen, and I will articulate what our process is as a committee and who our POC will be. All right, design development update from architect is the next item on our agenda. I don't think we have our normal presentation that we typically have. Is there anything that we should be considering updated on or know about prior to planning process?
Well, you're welcome to go through the set of drawings if you'd like, and the specification. We also have them digitally available. I can say that we've also shared previously in the week a progress version of this with Vertex, so I'd be happy to get their comment as well. But what we'd be requesting is permission to take what we have and get a cost estimate with it. We think it's pretty thorough. It's a complete DD set representing the design and decisions we've made to date, and I think it represents, what we would expect to have at this level of the project. So we're prepared to go and get a cost estimate with it. I mean, most of what we've done since you last saw us was a lot of detail work, so there's not really a whole lot I think we ought to get into in terms of that. It's mostly engineering behind the scenes stuff. But for everything that you've already heard us talk about, that's already been incorporated into the drawing set.
And maybe before because that's the next item on our agenda, so they go hand in hand in terms of the committee voting to proceed to the design development cost estimate. I think, Mr. Lemieux, it would be helpful if you could just outline what Vertex will be doing during this time, as well as between now and our meeting on November 27th, and how your process runs in
Yeah,
parallel
so-
or separate from
so
what
there's-
Vertex will be doing?
So there's two things. One, in our budget, obviously, is the second cost estimate, the parallel cost estimate. So, once this is tagged as ready to go, we'll send it out to our estimator as well, so that
I
ultimately.
thought we decided not to do
We
yours.
decide not to do that one, or
Well, we at least talked about not doing it.
talked about it?
That's why I think we should, so keep going, and then we'll
So, in the
discuss.
event we do it, okay, the idea is, takes about a couple weeks. Numbers go, you get numbers back. We look at them, we look at the bottom lines, obviously, to start there, and they're usually different, okay, but we'll go division by division and ultimately have a reconciliation where his estimator will sit with our estimator, with us, and we'll go through and say, why'd you carry this here? Sometimes a lot of it is just, well, I carried the such and such in this section. Oh, okay, I carried it in this section, so, you make those adjustments and it balances out. What you're looking for, though, is, wild differences, he's, we're off by $1 million each other. Whoa, why? And the reason why that's concerning, never mind just the budget, but if the estimator sees it that way, you worry about the bidding community having the potential to see it that way too, and you'll end up with crazy numbers for, a number of reasons. So we vet that out. Concurrently, now that these are done, we'll do our first constructability pass at this. So we'll have a series of comments that will look at civil, mostly coordination of drawings, civil, mechanical, architectural. We don't have a front end yet or a spec, so it's really, it's limited. So it's, if you call on the budget, our CD constructability review had many more, much more time in it, because there's more detail. We don't like giving comments to something just because it's not done, but if we see something trending a certain way, we're gonna call it out, and the goal there is for us to just have a conversation to better understand why they're doing things a certain way. Just trying to make sure things are coordinated well, so that if we're seeing it, someone else is gonna see it, and we'd rather it happen now than, through bid day or through a claim or that sort of thing later.
So if the committee decided to have the dual cost estimates going on, by the meeting on the 27th, would you both have cost estimates? Or would we just have
You might just have
context?
context,
Okay,
but, as soon as we have ours, I'll start we'll start the comparison. Again, if the order of magnitude is the same, great. Then there's less concern if the bottom line numbers are matching up. There's more concern if they're off. If they're off, you immediately, you want to reconcile it anyway, but a lot of times it's the shell game. It's here and not there. It's when there's a just wild disparity in the bottom line, first thing you do is you check the front page to make sure that what he's carrying for general conditions is what we're carrying, that the markups are all the same. The things that add on to those, hard costs are similar. Contingencies within the, what are they carrying for a design contingency, meaning all of the things that are yet to be defined that will turn into actual construction items. Some estimators will carry a larger percentage than others. So we want to normalize all those things and see how we compare, against hard cost to hard cost at that point.
and how does your feedback process work? Let's just say you see something in the construction documents, your
We list
cost
it.
estimator is still going out, how does that?
Well, constructability or estimate? Estimate
You
is
said you're
more-
gonna be doing some review of those documents that he
Yeah,
has.
so that's constructability. We will provide written comments to Jeff
Okay,
in sections, kind of as we finish them.
okay.
So that we're not holding up everything. We'll give them all the MEP comments at once. We'll give 'em
Usually
all-
it's like a long list
Yeah.
of things.
Yeah.
And that's very typical for us, and we sort of see that on a rolling basis too. As John was saying, they'll send off a round of comments, we'll distribute that, and then we might get another round. And they're usually based on different sections, like they might go through all the architectural and the civil, give us those comments while they're working on the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and the other stuff.
It's just a function of resources and who's available when these things pop up. We've already let everybody know that they're coming, so You know, civil may take a little longer, but obviously, there's a lot of civil still being decided. So again, we don't, from a budget standpoint, we're not gonna dive deep if it's not worth diving deep. I don't need to give him 2 pages of comments because things aren't done. That's it's a waste of your money. But if there's a lot of good detail there, yeah, we'll go a little harder.
So would your recommendation be that we do the dual cost estimate at the same time? Or we wait for any of your, I'll call it, review comments to be addressed in case those impact cost estimate? Or
Well,
how do you true that up?
You're-
Let's just say,
You're losing the comparative nature if he
Okay,
updates the
that's-
plans and then we estimate it. So you're either going to, the same guy doing the estimate that did the first one?
Oh, yeah.
So, you know, and this was, I think, part of the discussion you're alluding to, you know, is it worth it? Is it worth the $12,000 to do it now? Or do you wait and just do the $16,000 CD estimate? You know, it's a double-edged sword. It's easier to change things if we're high now. But if we're, you know what I'm saying, as we get 2 more months into this and we do the next estimate, all of a sudden that number is off budget, wait a minute, that 120 drawings has become 160, you know, at that point. It's harder to do it. So, you know, I would say, from a comparison standpoint, maybe you do this one. And if we're, end up both tracking in the same ballpark, then maybe you decide not to do the CD. That's what we did in Situate. They decided not to do it at the end, kick the money back into the budget, use it for something else. So I would say, so we would do it, we would have Jeff's input at the next meeting, but we'll keep working, you know, and as soon as we have it, you know, we'll do it and we'll reconcile, and if there is a hiccup, at that next meeting, we'll catch up with it.
so if you both do it concurrently,
Mhm.
let's just say Vertex finds something that context overlooked and it requires a change, do you go to your cost estimator and get a general idea of what that may have done without like redoing the whole process?
There's a couple of ways of doing that's what's called reconciliations, a couple of ways of doing it. Usually we wait for the 2 estimates to be done, we exchange them, and we kind of see what the ballpark of difference is. If it's small, then we pick out target items, and we look at targets that are different between the 2 estimates. If there's a lot of differences, then we might actually have a conference call or an actual meeting in one of our offices with the 2 estimators there, and we go through every single item and reconcile everything. We talk about why that estimator wanted to price steel one way and the other estimator wanted to price it differently, and talk about market forces and a whole lot of other things. So we've definitely done that. Not for every project, it's maybe not always necessary to go to that level of detail, but it has to do with initially, once we see those first 2 estimates come out, what do they look like? And, you know,
You glean a
where the
lot
differences
just from
are.
the CSI division comparison to see where the differences are. You know, and if it's a couple of points, you're not concerned. It's when one guy's got plumbing at $1 million, the other guy's at 700,000, you, whoa, someone's off, you know, someone's using a different. And again, a lot of the pricing here is going to be square foot pricing still, to some degree, right? I mean,
Well, this is pretty detailed.
Actually, yeah, okay.
I don't expect too much square footage.
Okay.
There might be a few areas where they'll do that, but I think he's, you know, maybe sprinkler or something like that, but I think he's gonna be able to use
Pretty much of it,
unit costs.
okay.
Any- Mr. Officer?
So that is kind of my question. Any estimate is gonna have, is only as good as the detail of the drawings that you've got, right?
Right.
Percentage-wise, how far along are those drawings that they'd be basing the estimate on?
So, you know, typically with a DD set, you're at like, you know, if you think of from 0 to 100%, you're around 30-40% complete in terms of the amount of detail that has to get into it by the ultimate end date. So that's why we essentially pick, if you look at 0 to 100, we pick like 30% and somewhere around 75% when we do our estimates. So, you know, we'll have another estimate later on. It'll be much closer to the end of the drawings. We'll have a better check on it. But as John mentioned before, the cost estimators typically have what's called a design contingency that essentially is a contingency against the fact that you just mentioned. It's not detailed enough to be able to estimate to that 100% level yet. And at the DD stage, it could be up is maybe even as 10%. I've had it as low as 5 or 3%. Depending on how detailed the drawings are, the estimators will kind of get a feel for that and put a percentage in. And then when we get to the next estimate, that percentage will get lowered because we've done more work. I've had times where we've done the CD estimate, and based upon the detail, you know, the owner, architect, and OPM have all agreed that we don't need to carry a design contingency because it's about as detailed as it's going to get. You're now just correcting very minor things. But one of the advantages of doing two different cost estimates at this stage is you get two different opinions about how complete the work is.
Okay.
Ms. Cook?
So, I think you've changed my mind tonight. But you said one thing that did it. And we'll make sure everybody caught what you said, which is, if there's something that's not clear, this may flush it out so that by the time you're ready to go out to bid, you have clarified something that might not be clear to the general contractor or any of the subcontractors and cause them to misbid on something because they didn't understand something.
There's two scenarios, either nobody bids it or two people bid it. In either case, it's bad for you.
Yeah, so it sounds like you think we should do this without just saying, I think you should do it, and it's pretty short money. I mean, I hate, you know, every penny counts, but it sounds like it's pretty short money and might reap a pretty big benefit, especially if they end up with some substantial differences that really do need to be reconciled. It'd be nice if they didn't, I guess. But I guess I'm going to probably vote to do both. What's the outside date for yours? What's the outside date to get them both done and reconciled?
So ours takes about 2 weeks to do, which means that the week of Thanksgiving, if John's was ready, the week of Thanksgiving is when we do the reconciliation to meet the Monday building committee deadline. But I don't know you can do it that fast.
You do all that work on the week of Thanksgiving.
Oh, yeah, after you eat the turkey.
You're good, you're good.
Go right in
So
there.
be realistic, what do you think the date is?
I'd say the first week of December, probably. I mean, I'm gonna, you know, you wanna do it, I'm gonna reach out. I mean, I've let the estimator, we're not doing it, we might do it, you know.
Yeah,
I'm gonna email him right now and tell him that we are doing it. And,
Yeah.
you know, with any luck, I'll have an answer back before we leave here tonight. But again, it's nothing, I would expect there's gonna be nothing so substantive that it's not gonna impede, you know, the context progress.
Right.
Unless their estimate comes out and there's a big bang up, in which case, okay, we're not gonna wait for for ours to catch up, it will. But, you know, if he finds $1 million bust immediately, you know, well, we're gonna start looking at that before we even get ours.
Right. I should also point out, no matter when we get the estimates, reconcile them, and review them, we will continue to be working on the drawing set, continuing to be detailing and getting into more detail. So whenever we actually review it with you, it doesn't hold us up. It doesn't hold the process up. So even if you felt like you wanted to delay your November 27th meeting till after you had both estimates together, so you didn't have to you got one shot to see both of them reconciled, which is often helpful. It won't change the schedule at all. It's just your preference.
Well, I don't know why we would look at one without, if we're doing the second, why wouldn't we wait for both to be done and reconciled? But that's just my opinion.
That would be, if we do two, my recommendation would be to have the meeting only after they've been reconciled, so that you get, you know, a better picture of where things stand.
We can tell you the number of the first one,
Yeah.
you know,
So,
give you an idea,
so
but
I'm cognizant that it will, I think there's an appetite from a lot of parties in town to just make sure we're headed in the right direction and we haven't uncovered something, right? Because if we've uncovered something, I don't think our budget's changing.
right.
That's changing, right?
Yeah,
I think
definitely.
we all, I think we all know that. So,
Yep.
pending availability, if we were to delay the next meeting a week, and I'll pull the committee in a second, can Vertex commit that I know he's probably firing away his email right now, but
Can
can
we answer
you?
that by the end of the meeting? Can we come back to this?
Yeah. we
Seriously, I
can-
may actually hear back from him,
Okay.
so.
So I think we'll talk about project schedule at the end, but I think that would just be something to be thinking about, because I think there seems to be a general consensus that we should be reconciling. What I would like to do before we move off of this item is I would like to have a formal vote to authorize both Context and, if the committee would like, Vertex to begin the design development cost estimating. I think we need to take a formal vote and get that on the record, then we can come back to when we're actually gonna review that with them. So, is there a motion?
So I'll make a motion to ask both Vertex to, excuse me? Oh, okay, let me start again. I'll make a motion to approve parallel cost estimates, one done by Context and one done by the Vertex estimator, to come back to us and have them reconciled, and we have two.
Is there a second? Mr. Wood seconded. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. This is probably just a formal approval, but you did have on your agenda that you wanted approval to move to the construction document phase.
Correct.
So I'll make a motion to authorize Context to proceed to the construction document stage. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Moorhead. Is there any discussion?
Yes. What does that mean?
It's simply just turning the page, essentially. We go from what's called design development, which is more about designing and more into the detailing and documentation stage. Typically, it happens as soon as you start doing your DD cost estimate. We turn the page and start detailing the work.
So this is saying, this is pretty much the plan that we're building.
Correct.
What we see before us
Correct.
is it, and that's what's getting built.
Yes. Yes.
Subject, obviously, to
I
the
understand.
regulatory process.
And the
Right.
cost
Get
estimate.
it.
And the
And the
cost
cost.
estimate.
And the cost.
And a bunch of other
Like
meetings.
inside conditions.
Feelings.
Yeah, to be honest, it doesn't prevent design from continuing. It just gets us one peg closer to bid date.
Understood. Thank you.
Any further discussion on that motion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Next item on the agenda, you got your email out? Ready to take the RFQ documents? Or do you want me to come back to that?
No, I've got it. It's
All
fine.
right. So the next item on the agenda is review of pre-qualification RFQ documents. So in the meeting package you got before the meeting, there was a general contractor pre-qualification package and a subcontractor pre-qualification package. Appears when they were actually printed, only the general contractor one was printed, but Mr. Lemieux walked Mr. Purple and myself through just the general documents, got a lot of information from the town over the past couple weeks. And I don't expect we're gonna go page by page for this, but
Yeah.
maybe you could highlight to the committee what action, if any, other than people to help with the scoring
Sure.
process, that you'd like
Yep.
any action on tonight.
So this, I know you're all very excited to see this in front of you. This is statutory form, okay, that is put out by DCAM. This is what we have to use because we're over $10 million, okay? The subcontractor form looks very much like it. The only difference is once we have the cost estimate, you're telling the people who are requesting this document what the estimated cost for that is. That happens because part of this form talks about the firm's financial ability to be able to do the work. So you want to make sure that when you get their response, their DCAM certificate shows that they can do $700,000 worth of roofing, $1.5 million worth of electrical. We make sure of that. Also, when you're checking for the firm's financial health on the subs, as an example, one of the metrics is how much revenue do you have on the books for next year and how that relates to the size of this job. If the answer is 0, that's a warning light that you have no work yet, and it's already, the end of 2017. So reality here is that, we go through this, there's a lot of boilerplate information, there's a summary about the job, there's a timeline for which they need to respond to this, and in the end, then they are scored in basically 3 major categories: management experience, references, both project and credit references, as well as the financial section, which is the capacity to complete projects. For the general for both subs and GCs, one of those in the financial section is just, as I said, revenue. For the GCs, it gets a little bit more complicated. There are audited financial statements that are provided, and we haven't quite come to the solution of what we're going to use as the metric to do that. Because ultimately, you're giving them how they're going to be scored. Something like, for your project references, how many public safety buildings, 5 or more positive public safety building references scores 10 points. 4 or more scores 8, 3 or more scores 6, and that's how we measure. How we do this measuring for the audited financial statements hasn't really been decided yet. So that's still working on that. So we'll get back to that as we get a little bit closer. There's also some.
So by that, there's a couple of counts on this board. Do you mean you're talking about the quality of the financial statements, how to read those statements, and what to glean from those statements?
You got it. Positive. Are they over leveraged? The problem is you have a very small window to make your definition, and as you know, I do not like reading financial statements because they can be, twisted and, whatever. So are we talking about people with just a positive cash balance that's a positive? Are they, how much debt do they have? What are their ratios? We need to come up with what those things are so that we can really get a apple to apple to apple, comparison of those things.
And Mr. Lehman, so just looking at the draft, it has 6.
I didn't like, I didn't like this.
Okay, so you're revising that
Yeah, I
because you
want to
wanna
revise that. This is from a different project. I use as an example, but I found that everybody was over leveraged, and so I'm giving people 0, and I know these are good firms. So it's, this was the last architects, on the last job I used this on, their attempt at this. I've seen some that are much simpler, but this is really the only thing where I'd like we can have a little bit of discussion, either with, those of you that are accountants on the, on the committee or not. But again, we don't have to decide that today. Aside from those things, there are some mandatory requirements that when they submit these responses, they need to have. They need a letter from their bonding agent that says they can bond the project 100% of the value that they bid. It's a statutory requirement. You'd be shocked at how many people mess it up. The last time I did this, I got one made out to a different town for a different project. It's an automatic boot. You can throw the papers in the trash. It's just one of those things. Their DCAM certificate and their update statement need to be provided as well. They both need to be current at the time that they send it. So those are the mandatory. There's no points given. It's just if you don't have those things, it gets thrown in the trash. So once those come in, we talked about having the committee. Typically, we'll break the references down between ourselves and the architect, so we're not duplicating efforts. Whoever's on that group with us won't have to do the reference checks. We'll provide you all the info. I keep a master spreadsheet. You feed it back to me. In the end of the day, so you need a minimum score of 70, and in any of those 3 categories, management, references, or financial, you need to score at least half of it, get half the points. So it's 50, 30, and 20. So somebody can have a 70, but if they only got 20 in management experience, you can't pre-qualify them. So there's, so I have a spreadsheet made out that will, highlight in red if we get a bad set of scores in there. We average all our scores together, and at the end of the day, we'll end up pre-qualifying 95+% of the folks that do submit. So the good part of the process is that, at least for the GCs, you get an idea of who the superintendents are, you get an idea of the folks' background. The management personnel is great. You don't get that in a job under 10 million. You have no idea who the people are that could be working on the job, those kind of details. So no action necessary for tonight, just, they're both drafted. I need to work with Jeff a little bit just to talk about timing, bid timing versus, we ultimately would like to see this process finish about 6 to 8 weeks before the bids go out, because we basically have to invite folks to bid on this. We also want to leave ourselves a little bit of buffer room in case we don't get enough responses for any one of the categories. If we get less than 3, we have to go out again, which is another 2 weeks in the sun. a week for the Central Register to post, 2 weeks to get the response. At that point, we're waiting for them to come back. If we don't get 3, we then have the choice of either going with less than 3 or tossing the category out for pre-qualification and just bidding it as an open filed sub-bid, which, you know, is fine as well.
So do you expect at our next meeting that you'll be asking for authorization on this so that you can then coordinate getting these out?
Yeah, what I would like by the next meeting is to have spoken with Jeff, understand where we are with the schedule, so I can let everybody know when this is gonna go on the street, when we expect responses back, you know, that whole thing, you know. You don't wanna do it too early, because you'll get an unrealistic view of the pool that are gonna bid your project. You know, if you pre-qualified now for a bid in April, people may get 2 or 3 jobs, and your pool of 6 GCs is 4 before you even started. So we wait, but by waiting to get a little closer, it's more work as we're getting close to the end. So it really all kind of has to come together, you know, pretty well. I'd prefer to stay away from the holidays with this, because you're also going to get, you're not going to get great quality of response coming back in.
So rough estimate, this sounds like it's going out in the new year, like very early.
I think very early, yep. And we don't need to put it out for a long time, 2 or 3 weeks minimum. This is, the firms that get these are used to getting these, and they're very good at putting them together. So it's not like the longer you wait, the better quality you're gonna get. We can just do it, get it done, get them in, start reviewing.
Any other questions on this document? In terms of, Vertex had a request to us to appoint 2 parties to assist in this process that represent the town's interest. I had an action item from the last meeting to consult with town clerk and attorney general's office of if we appointed 2 members from this committee, whether that would constitute a subcommittee. It is very clear it constitutes a subcommittee that would be subject to open meeting law. Whereas Mr. Purple is going to be involved already just from a procurement perspective, the follow-up question that I now have is, given that he sits on this committee as an ex officio but has no vote, if we had him and another member, whether that would require open meeting or not for the subcommittee. Either way, we need to provide 2. So I think it's just going to be a question of what the rules are, and then this committee can decide what direction we want to go with this at the next meeting as well. Any questions on that?
Or you can volunteer tonight.
So you're waiting for that answer?
I think it's prudent because it may change how we view how we work the process. Again, we're trying to be transparent with the process, so it's just a matter of how we conduct this, but we are sensitive to the fact that there are going to be financial statements of firms that will be reviewed at that. So there's just going to be it was interesting to me, just going through the process, that there are many towns that build buildings, and it seemed like that type of question hadn't necessarily come up, but the answer was crystal clear, and as chair of the committee, I have every intention of abiding by whatever advice we're given.
Do we have other ex officio members of the committee?
The 2 chiefs.
Thank you.
And it doesn't need to be, as you said, it's 2 members that represent the owner. That's, it's not building committee, it's, you know, it just, I need 2.
Got it. All right, so I'll get some more information and continue the dialogue at the next meeting. Any,
Is there anybody in the committee that would be interested in volunteering? We want to find that out.
Let's just wait and see what the answer is. Excuse me? Let's just wait and see whether we can or we can't because of the.
next item on the agenda, water line design proposal. This was an item put in front of us at the last meeting. Vertex advised us that they had some work to do in terms of reviewing it. We now have a revised proposal. I don't know, Mr. Lemieux, if you have any commentary that you
Yeah,
want to
no-
just add?
No, I think that, and they were basically, they dropped their construction administration down to 20 workdays, more of a month as opposed to a month and a half. And I like that approach better, given the fact that they are on the town, they are signed up with the town as, a task order vendor. If we're gonna go over, we can pay them the extra money then, as opposed to signing up for it now. So if the job goes long, you've got the rates, they can authorize, we can bring another task order to them to expand this. So it dropped it to, from 78,750 to 69,700. So, and even that construction, and that has construction administration at about $18,100. So, again, if it gets done faster, that number would shrink as well. So you've got a series of lump sums for the design portion, and then the internal construction administration, and then you've got an external number, or excuse me, a T&M number for the external work.
So if approved, how would you, as our representative, oversee this to make sure that we don't have another task order, if at all possible, or furthermore, push them towards
Well, I
a
think
lower
it,
num-
it's gotta be, this is a separate construction project. It's just understanding, there needs to be some synergy between who's going to be running this job for PAR, who the contractor is, just, being included in those meetings whenever they come up, so that Steve can attend or our clerk can attend, just to make sure that the coordination is happening and it's moving. So if we get the sense that it's dragging, then we'll let you know that. I'm sure I would hope that PAR would know that it's dragging too, so.
And this is just design documents for the water
Desi-
main extension.
Design and construction administration for, it's the whole designer fee for the water line.
Right.
Are there any other questions on this item?
So where does this fit in the original budget? Is it,
We're carrying a standard, not standard, we have a line item for water line extension. This was anticipated. The water line, that's design and construction, was being carried at $400,000.
okay, so this is 69 out of 400.
Right, and I think initial estimates are that all in somewhere between 4 and 5 is what
Oh,
they're.
I think I heard a slightly larger number. I think I heard between 5 and 6, wasn't that?
Construction,
For construction, yeah.
but it's gonna go out to bid.
Yeah, oh
Right,
yeah.
so-
Yeah, no, that was just a number I heard from one of those joint utility meetings. Someone was throwing numbers out about that. But again, it will be designed and procured separately. Who's running that procurement for the town?
Karen Gallagher, it looks like.
I guess PAR would be for the DPW? Yeah.
Any other questions, comments on this? Are there any motions to approve the proposal as presented?
So moved?
Is there a second? Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Next item on the agenda is, we know Context is working feverishly on a lot of different things to move this process forward, but it became clear to me that there are certainly things that they are not responsible for as part of this project. And I've asked Mr. Lemieux to comment based on his other experience as our project manager of things that we should be considering now, short-term and long-term, so that we don't end up in a situation in 6 months saying, oh, I thought Jeff handled that, and it really is not within their purview or their expertise. So I don't know, Mr. Lemieux, if you have a list or how you want to run through
No,
this. but-
I think the single biggest thing that, so you've got a few things that were in your budget that you excluded. that original budget that was on the big PowerPoint. One of the things was FF&E. Okay, so obviously there needs to be, now that this is locked down, some discussion about actually getting the furniture design for this and getting dollars together to figure out what we're gonna put, who's gonna look at it, the chief's gonna go, just like understand what the FF&E process is going to be, because we don't have a designer who's proposing these things, okay? That's smaller, that's because furniture is easy, it's through the state bid list. WB Mason wins most of the bids. It's there, the procurement's easy because it is through that state bid list, so it makes, the numbers are already there, it's easy to do. The one that's more complicated is communications, having to do with the new station. Right now, Jeff is designing a station that has all sorts of pipes and boxes in it to put all these wires in. You haven't bought the wires yet. You've bought electrical wires, you'll buy data cable and that sort of thing. But as far as the guts about IT and communication, phone, radios, how that all comes together, he's building you the place to put it all, but somebody needs to be working on the actual design of that system. There's a few pitfalls when it comes to designing communications, because a lot of the communications consultants that are out there aren't just communications consultants, they're also salesmen for certain lines of radios. So your Acme radio consultant also sells Motorola on the side. Guess which systems, they design. It's just the way that it is. So, and I understand in speaking with Jason that, the town is in the middle of maybe some switching over of vendors right now. Not the best timing, but at the end of the day, we need to understand who that ultimate vendor is going to be so that we can get them engaged in this process while we're still drawing. Because ultimately, we need to know what hardware is going to be put in the server rooms, all of those, we can work out those details, because most of your communication now, a lot of it's internet-based, when you're talking about telephones, when you're talking about data, it's all going to end up in the middle of your server room. We may know where all the data jacks and things like that go, but the stuff that's going to make it all run and make it live isn't in his contract. So,
When you say, I'm just trying to understand, they're looking for a new vendor for the maintenance and procurement and maintenance of
I'll
what's
defer
going to
to-
be there, or?
Chief, I don't know if either one of you just want to talk about where you're at in your process and what you're looking at.
So basically, what we're looking at is the radio communication, which would be like the dispatching equipment and our radio equipment that would go into the building. So right now, we have two vendors that we're looking at, our current vendor and another vendor coming in. So we're looking at costs and prices for those services and how it's going to fit into the budget. So we have a vendor this week that we're going to meet with, and then we should have a decision by the meeting that we're going to have on the 20th, and we'll know better by then.
So as soon as we have that decision, it will be important to get that vendor in to sit with Jeff and the MEP designer to make sure that everything they need for a backbone
So,
to host the system
right.
will be installed.
Is the intention to take the current equipment and move it to the new station?
No, probably not, because most of it's approaching the end of life, so we're looking at new equipment. But
So they
It's
get
an-
a blank slate. They get a new building, and they're getting new equipment, basically. Is that fair to say?
well, for the most part, and then I think it's important here too, because we're talking about electrical, so more likely than not, we're buying the equipment, and the electrical contractor, correct me if I'm wrong, will probably run all the wiring and all the infrastructure, and then the radio vendor would come in and hook up his systems and do what they have to do.
But
Are you speaking for just you as far as it's end of life, or are you talking about Chief?
No, this is the radio equipment for both police and fire.
What happened to the new stuff that was bought with the Madison Place money 2 years ago?
That was, we're going on
$300,000?
3 or 4 years ago
Mhm.
now. And then these are 10-year systems that were bought. So we're looking to use some of the equipment that is there for one of the workstations, but
But we spent $300,000, so you're saying that's all gonna be thrown away?
no, it's not going to all be thrown away. No.
But we haven't even had that discussion yet to know what is coming, what needs to be bought. So while this whole project's being built, there's a whole other 3 or 4 line items of budget that are being, sourced out, procured, bought, tracked, from different sources, from state bid lists, from vendors, so that we can make sure it all ends up in the building and has enough room where it needs to go. BDA so that the radios work, bidirectional amplifiers so that the radios work in the building, even in the, detention cells. I mean, there's all sorts of little details. On top of that system, then there's also, we haven't talked about security yet. Are we talking about keys? Are we talking about card access? Are we talking about keypads? All of those things need to be decided now so that, we have a budget line item for it, but we need to know what we're putting in because a lot of, if it's is it an electrified door frame? Far different than a normal door frame. We need to know that decision now so that that can all be, put on these drawings. So this is the time to start having these discussions, and the timing works out just right if the communication is there. We need to start having meetings with the chiefs to talk about those kind of specifics so that we can figure out what are we going to do, how are we going to source it, and again, so that when the security vendor comes to put up cameras or to put up, keypads, there's something to connect it to. There's a pull string in the wall to pull the wire through so that we can, it can all work together. I'm not so worried about the security because that's something that, Jeff's guys are used to seeing to a degree. But when we talk about communications, communications is its own animal. It's separate.
But don't we need someone hired to actually oversee this whole process that knows how to do all this from A to Z, including the computer piece of it? I don't know what Tom LaFlame can do,
Well,
but.
and that's the last piece was the IT piece of this. Who is your IT person? They should get involved as well. There's the communications piece of IT that runs off of, the network, but then there's the IT piece of IT, servers and data storage and all those kind of things. Who's going to make those decisions so that it all, all pieces together. And everyone has a workstation when we move over there, and it's all, what equipment's coming, if any, or is it new, all of that, because we need to get all of that into these drawings. I know he's got placeholders for this stuff, but as far as the layout of the room,
It's not.
and some of these things are big, just the, E911 is another piece of it. An E911 changeover from where you are to where it's going, they give you a date. And if you miss the date, it's a month later. So from a coordination standpoint, we need to know that that's coming, that that's moving along, so that we can, address it appropriately. And when the building goes live, you don't have the luxury. This building needs to turn on a particular day because the other building's going to turn off on a particular day, and everyone's going to have to move over. You may roll it, but there's a lot of other coordination to make sure that it happens. And these are other vendors on top of the contractor that's going to win this job.
So I think that there's a word of caution here that all procurement from this point forward on anything to do with communications really needs to be done with an eye to being in a new building and what needs to be, A, in that building, and B, bought to be compatible. Okay.
Correct.
Well, I don't think you're buying anything between now and when the building opens unless you have an emergency, right? Like, right, in terms of procuring.
Right.
They're not going out and buying new portable radios this year to then have to change them next year. Is
No,
that what
no,
That's
and it wouldn't,
exactly where I'm going.
and it
That's what
wouldn't
I'm
be
sure.
portable radios, it would be more the
Base,
base
yeah.
radios,
The hubs, yeah.
the central equipment that needs to go within the building.
Yeah.
Not anything in vehicles or anything that's got nothing to do with that type of communications equipment. This is just strictly the communications equipment inside the building, the dispatch consoles, and any of the repeaters or anything like that that needs to speak for the radio system.
As an example, the dispatch room, I just confirmed with Jeff, you know, as a floating floor, there's a lot of stuff that's gonna be in this room, and all the wiring is, you know, it's just easier to do it. It's underneath, so that you can put it all in and not worry about it, and be able to access it later and not bury all of these wires to the extent that, you know, you need to fix something someday. So,
I would say that our experience is similar to what has been said. IT, communications, security is one of the most challenging parts of these projects because it's the part that you can't turn around before a system that you just put in is obsolete. So keeping abreast with technology, making sure that you're understanding what systems are being currently utilized by the departments, what systems they'd like to move into or may need for the future, and then what is sort of even further out there is all part of the discussion. So our engineers, Garcia Gillespie de Souza, actually have a specialty in this area. They are the engineers assigned to the building infrastructure, not the IT stuff per se, but because they do know and have done a lot of police and fire emergency facilities, they can help facilitate that discussion. So once we have vendors in place for all of these different systems and we have points of contact for all of these different systems, the IT director in town, the radio vendor, you know, security, we can have that one meeting with all of those people there, which is currently targeted for November 20th, fast approaching, with our crew to sort of walk everybody through it. The goal is to, by the end of that meeting, have a full list of everything that all decisions we made and everything that's going to be going into that building. So number one, we can design the infrastructure appropriately. We know where it's all going. As John said, we know we have the space for it all and where it's all going to lead. But also that the points of contact, the vendors and the town, understand what they need to do. From that meeting, that's the kickoff, but from that meeting, everybody starts sprinting towards the finish line. And we'll have to have a series of meetings and probably internally within the two departments as well with their vendors to make sure everybody's still on track. Things will come up along the process where, you know, initially we thought we only needed this type of system, and now it turns out we need a couple more modules, and we'll have to regroup, you know, confirm everything again, and then keep going forward. And then when it comes to procurement, all of those systems will be procured individually, many of them off the state bid list, and there will be a tabulation that has to be done to make sure that the initial estimates that were done through the vendors are also proving out through quotes that they're getting at the time of procurement, so that, you know, they're all tracked in the budget. Happens with every public safety building. So it's a known thing. It is complicated, but it's also eminently doable. So it shouldn't be scary, but it's just, we know right now that it's one of the more complicated aspects of the project, and getting everybody plugged in now is critical to the success.
I have a question for you guys. How much of this is going to fall under the GC's contract? And is that still up to us to say, okay, well, let's try and get the security under the GC, or let's try and get...
You have a lot of options, and part of what we need to discuss in the beginning of stages of these coordination meetings is that question itself. You can put quite a bit of it under the GC or the electrician under his hat. You know, there's advantages to going off the state bid list because you get slightly lower pricing because you don't have the markups associated with it if you're getting the GC to do it. You have a little bit more control of what you want to get because you can pick off the state bid list, whereas if you go to open bid, it's got to be open bid.
It's got to be more than one
You've
option.
got to have three options, and you may not get the one that you were looking for.
Right, and I guess that's what I'm saying, like, so everything that we're talking about doing is if we go off the state bid list, we don't have to file
Yeah,
for
so
all
what,
those guys, right?
typically what we end up doing are the wires and the device plates part of the electrician's scope? You know, the Cat 6 wires, are they part of the electrician's scope, or are they part of the vendor scope? And that's usually a thing that can go back and forth. The actual hardware apart from sometimes camera systems or particularly like card readers, the actual hardware is usually always by the vendor. And even security systems are oftentimes just by the vendor because of what you want, a certain type of system that you've decided that's the one that you want. So, security is a good one because with, like John said, the door system, we have to know what type of locks are we doing so we have the correct power, the correct frame prep.
And
for the
different
components.
chiefs want to do it different ways. Every different station we've done has had a different kind of hierarchy of keys, cards, whatever, and that's up to you guys to decide,
We'll even get it across the two sides of the building.
Yep.
Here, right, so.
Yeah, and it's just, but think about it, when somebody leaves, what does that do to you? Is it just changing a code, or do you have to change a core? Keys are cheaper on the front end, but not if you're gonna keep
Doing it.
changing them out.
But for me, what I'm saying is everything that's gotta get all into our hardware schedule or something.
Yeah,
right?
and we have multiple
big.
discussions about this. We've actually already even talked about it in earlier parts of the design phase. So we kind of have an idea where things are going, but as we go, we want to keep checking in to reconfirm these decisions. We'll have a meeting that's strictly about pointing out every single camera location, every single card reader in the entire building to make sure that we've actually got them in the places the chiefs want them and don't have extra ones that nobody wanted, because they're expensive. So I'd rather not put in any extra ones that we don't need, but I also want to make sure we've got the minimum that's necessary.
I'm still really confused here. Who is the person who is going to design everything to make sure it's all going to work together? The chiefs don't have the expertise to do this. We now do have an IT person full-time in Southborough. We've had for a couple years. He's very competent, but I don't know that he's got the time to do it, nor has he's got the expertise to put the whole thing together. Aren't there people that you hire that can do this from A to Z and make sure that we aren't going at cross purposes here and end up buying something that doesn't work, which is what.
Yeah, there are two strategies. One is the one that we've tended to use most, and that is to let the vendors do the design. So you hire individual vendors for each system, and they perform the design as part of their services. They select the equipment, perform the design for that equipment, and then that's coordinated with the building design, and then procured and put into the building and put into service. They do all the testing as well. The other option is to hire a consultant, another designer, independent, that would come in and put together all of these things under their own umbrella and some, oftentimes, help with the procurement as well. And as John alluded to, we don't do that as much because those vendors or those consultants come in with 2 or 3 other hats they wear, and they usually end up steering people into a certain type of system because they also sell that type of system in their second job. And what we've seen, the frustrations in other departments in that type of approach is that they get frustrated either during the process because they're not getting a full and fair analysis, or after the fact because, they didn't realize there was other options. Nobody told them. The consultant that they worked with didn't tell them there were other options. Then they realize after they've got it, I don't really like this. I could have had that. I didn't know that. That's frustrating. So we've tended to not go that route. All of our recent billings have not used consultants for that reason, and they've all used the individual vendors to provide the design.
But when the individual vendors have the same issue, they are going to want to do it the way they're used to doing it. They're not going to say, here's 5 choices as far as how to do it.
Correct.
And, these are the pros and cons of the 5?
Yeah, in that approach, as the chief pointed out, it's up to the department to work with various vendors to compare the pros and cons of the wares of those vendors. Talk to other chiefs that have them in other departments, and sort of do that due diligence on their own. We haven't yet defined, and this is just a problem with this particular part of the industry, we've yet to find a truly independent third party that will give you, unbiased reviews over everything. To some degree, that's kind of what our engineers provide, because they've seen all these various systems being used, and they've had to integrate them into the building in various ways, so they have some anecdotal stuff. They don't do that as a profession, but we can sort of give them their commentary. But there isn't really a third party out there that is unbiased.
And I guess part of the issue is then for each procurement contract, is it part of their contract to make sure that whatever they install is compatible with the IT? I mean, at some point, shouldn't there be someone saying, hey, wait a minute,
So
we
I
gotta
think-
make
I
sure that
think,
they're
tell
all,
me
they're all
if I'm wrong,
compatible?
I think once the vendors are chosen and we understand what the items are, I think that's where GGD comes in and does that cross-check of comparison as they're now taking all of these parts and saying, okay, how are we laying this out in the building?
Right.
And how are those systems, new systems, gonna work? So, yes, there is somebody checking to make sure that those things are compatible and they work together. And ultimately, that's, their consultant. So,
To tell you the truth, though, most of these systems are standalone. They don't have a lot of interactivity with them. There's certain systems that can do cameras, card access, integrated with some communications features that certainly our engineers know of and can help, the vendors steer them all to something that's compatible. But you can also do them as standalone systems as well, and they all work equally well. I mean, basically these days, as long as you've got a server and network cable and switches, you can run all this stuff wherever you want. And oftentimes we do dispatch rooms, and there's just individual systems, a monitor and a keyboard set up, and you just switch over to different systems for various, and I'm sure that's what you guys have in your current communications.
Yeah,
setup.
I think, part of the IT mix in here is we're not sure how the radio system's gonna communicate. So we have a repeater that's on a tower on EMC, and then we have receiver sites throughout town. So when a police car or a fire truck are on Pine Hill Road or Southville Road, when they talk, we gotta make sure the dispatch can hear us. So part of what IT is, they're looking at whatever they're running into the building. We may now, our receiver sites may be fiber optic coming in. Right now, we have copper coming from Oak Hill, Overlook Drive into the police and fire complex, which copper lines, phone lines right now are becoming obsolete. So if there's availability for fiber optic, we would do that. If there's another option over the internet that Tom from IT knows about or is gonna run or has a plan in place, we may consider that. So that's kind of the importance of getting everybody together and meshing that whole system in together with the vendors that we have and our IT person too, as well.
Just go to the microphone.
Mimi Luttrell, 19 Oregon. I'm wondering if our Municipal Technology Committee has been consulted on this at all and asked if they can be of any service or
I think
if
right
they
now
have any
it's been
ideas.
referred to the IT director, who's working very closely with the chiefs at the meetings. So I think it's a great idea that he should be feeding in. I would just say, there's a lot of public safety professionals up here. I do think that the chiefs have more experience than you think in this area, because they're the ones sitting there trying to listen to the radio, and someone's on Pine Hill Road at the other end of the town, and they're out there chasing a lot of times where these issues are, now and in the future. So I think we need to get as many people at the table with the right expertise, but I think the reason I put this on the agenda was similar to Ms. Cook's concern, is we just need to make sure that someone is quarterbacking it, because it is not context. Vertex has told me that this is not their expertise. They can certainly lend assistance
track,
from.
yeah, as far as the budgeting and the tracking and all that, that's no problem. But the answer, do you need a tower? I can't tell you that, but that is something that I think, we should have a quick discussion with the chiefs, because a lot of the stuff radio is sometimes line of sight. You might be able to alleviate a lot of that stuff with a tower, but what does adding a tower, do to planning, zoning, that kind of thing? That's a piece that hasn't been flushed out yet.
But we didn't answer Mimi's question. I don't think the technology committee is even formed yet. Our staff, we passed the bylaw, but I don't think there's anybody on it yet.
So the new statutory committee, you're correct, is not formed yet. I believe it's going to be the intention of the school committee, library trustees, and board of selectmen, each who appoint members to this committee, to probably do joint interviews sometime during this month, and then to do appointments sometime before the first meeting in December. So hopefully appointments will be made sometime in the next 30, 45 days.
And Tom is ex officio on that committee, automatic, or your IT director?
Yeah, the IT director for the school, Tom, as well as the part-time person for the library are all considered ex officio on that.
So, Chiefs, is there anything in advance of your meeting in trying to corral the vendors that this committee can do to assist in the effort, or will you come back with some requests at our next meeting?
At this point, I don't think there's any assistance that we need from anybody on the committee, but we may, on the meeting on the 20th, if a representative wanted to come to that meeting and sit and listen into what the proposals are and what direction we're going in. But at this point, I don't think we need really any assistance. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I think you hit it right on the head. I don't have a great deal of technical experience in this. I'm just listening to the vendors now, and we'll have another meeting on Thursday, and hopefully can shed a lot more. But I know the first vendor we talked to is very professional. I'm hoping that the second one will be just as prepared, and we'll have a plan to go forward with, probably sometime later this week or very early next week. I'm learning a lot, just listening to them. And the first vendors prepared a very good proposal that's opened up my eyes to some of the infrastructure and some of the operating systems that we're talking about. I think it was mentioned earlier, I think by the time we moved into the building, the current system that we're calling new will be 6 years old and has a 10-year shelf life. And I'm not sure that we're looking to just renew that system going forward, and it's going to be a more in-depth discussion as, probably as early as sometime next week. But you're right. There's a lot of questions to be answered, and I think we're moving to get those quickly.
Any further items on this point? So I'll add this as a standing item to our agenda moving forward until it's no longer needed. But I think we'll be on there for a while. Next item that will be standard moving forward is a project budget update. So there was a template provided by Vertex that they use on other projects. They basically have taken the budget that we presented at town meeting and the various aspects of it. That's our budget for now. Obviously, this is going to be built out a lot more once we get the cost estimate back in the next 30 days. I don't know if there's any questions to date from the committee. The one thing I will point out is I know Mr. Purple has put Vertex in touch with the town accountant, and going forward there will be a reconciliation of, we've authorized costs, but then how much is actually, how many checks have actually been cut related to each of these line items. I think in summary, for the public's benefit, is there's no use of contingency dollars to date, and no item is tracking outside of the prescribed budget.
What will accompany this, which you don't have because they're blank right now, will be two other tabs. One that is purely the contingency line item when we do need to start using it, and we'll track every PCO or whatever we're going to tag to the contingency against that. And then a third sheet, which will be the expenditures to date, so that you can see what's been paid and how those tie to each of those 27 line items. We'll track that along the way.
Any other questions or comments on this? Next item on the agenda is project schedule update. We were provided with a new schedule. It just lists out and confirms some of the meetings that have been scheduled. I don't know if there's anything else we should be aware of, Jeff?
No, we've actually, you mentioned them, many of the meetings at the beginning. We just talked about the meeting on the November 20th to review all those security IT technology items. The only question would be whether we hit another meeting on the 27th, or we are now delayed for that cost estimate review. It sounds like we don't know yet, but that's the only question at this point. Everything else is, as you said.
Okay. Any questions on project schedule? All right. Approval of outstanding invoices. We have two that were presented to us this evening. The first is from Vertex for a total cost of $4,706.25. This covers their activities related to our project for the month of September. Is there any questions on that particular invoice? Is there a motion to approve the invoice as presented?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Officer. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Mr. Barry seconded. Is there any further discussion on the invoice? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Second is a invoice from Context Architecture for $150,900 in fees plus $7,600 in expenses, which relates to McPhail for the extra septic pit, perk test pits. What I've asked Vertex to do is provide us with a cover letter with their thoughts on the invoice. So when an invoice is received, Vertex communicates with Context and resolves any questions that they have and makes a formal recommendation to us to approve it. My expectation, we would do this for any invoice from any vendor other than themselves moving forward, just as a matter of due course. They are recommending that we pay the amount. And I think the only other thing I would point out, just from my review of the invoice, is that they've essentially billed the majority of their design development, which we've just basically signed off. They've billed about 80% of it to date. So, you know, there's still an additional 20% to come, but it's a fixed fee contract. So, at least in my view, is the billings align with the level of work that has been completed as to the date of the invoice, which was through essentially the month of October. Are there any questions for Vertex or Context on this particular invoice? There a motion to approve it as presented.
So moved.
Mr. Berry makes the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Moorhead. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Next item is another standing agenda item, Golf Course Committee update. We heard a little bit from Mr. Pilecki during the public session of public comment session earlier. Mr. Rooney typically gives the update. I don't know, Mr. Pilecki, if there's anything further we should be aware of what your committee is up to?
No, I think that having the architect on board is the key. You know, I'm not sure I need to seek formal permission to talk to Jeff here.
Card.
Got his card, okay, we're good. But we're gonna try and do that as fast as possible and get out of the way, make that work, while we're working on the long-range plans in parallel. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Pilecki? All right, have you heard back from your cost estimator?
No, I just looked.
Okay. So I'm gonna run with the assumption that he is not gonna be ready and reconciled by the Monday after Thanksgiving, but he will be ready by Monday, December 4th.
Okay.
Is that a fair?
Or could be.
If his cost estimator can do it in 2 weeks.
His cost estimator knew it was coming.
Right.
All right.
That's the big key.
All right.
That's most of it done probably already.
That's right, he's updating the schematic, is that right?
Yeah. I would like, so my recommendation would be that we push our meeting back 1 week. We can obviously change our meeting date should we hear some sort of feedback, but I'm expecting that Vertex will keep the foot on the gas pedal and use their relationships with whoever your cost estimator is to try to get this done for that meeting. So does the 4th work for this committee?
So the 27th?
27th would be moved back to the 4th. My goal, if all goes well, would be to request a spot on the Board of Selectmen agenda the next night. That might be ambitious, but we owe them an update, and I don't have an update to go back without a new cost. I think, Ms. Cook, I'd probably just have advisory, see if they want to post a meeting for the same night, and just knock out both at the same time, get any feedback. Of course, if there's an issue or there's a reconciliation, we're gonna go prepared. We're not gonna just bring whatever number you bring us, no matter how good, bad, or ugly it is. I think, you know, if we're not ready, they can always pass and take the item at another public meeting. But I think that would be what I'm planning to line up, unless someone has any objections to that. Okay. So Vertex will confirm by tomorrow that that works, and then I'll confirm to this committee that that's our meeting. I assume we want to start at 6:30, not 6, for that particular evening. So next meeting will be Monday, December 4th at 6:30 p.m. I'll confirm that this room is available. Likely planning.
It is planning that night.
Yeah, so just, Jeff, I know you were anticipating a second planning board hearing end of December, like their second meeting that month. Is there a chance that you're on their agenda that night?
Yeah. Let's just see what happens next
Okay.
week. You know, we have a review with the staff, and,
Okay.
you know, we'll get some feeling as to how things go. And we may even have to wait until the 13th before we kind of get a real feel as to whether or not adjustments that need to be made take longer than, you know. And in many communities, I can't remember about this one, they have a filing deadline before the meeting, so you can't just, you know, sometimes it's hard to get on the next agenda because you can't give them, you actually don't have time to give them the documents with enough time to review before the next meeting. So sometimes you have to skip one. So we'll play
All
by
right.
ear.
So I think we'll proceed as planned, likely at the fire department, but we'll post accordingly ahead of time. Any other business or public comment?
I've got one question. Where do we stand with the approval by whichever one, waiting for the House or the Senate, as far as the land swap?
Glad you asked, so I can share some good news. So the House and Senate, we received notification yesterday that the House and Senate have both approved the special act. It's now gone to the governor's desk. So we've put a request into the governor's office to move this as quickly as possible. The hope is, I think, that we can conclude and conclude the transaction with St. Mark sometime in the next 30 days or so. So hopefully by the end of this month, first part of December, you know, we can be working on a piece of property that we own.
Thank you. Any other comments? Seeing none, motion to adjourn? Motion's made, seconded. Anyone? All right, all those in favor? We're adjourned.